For those of you viewing the live stream, thank you for joining us. Let's begin Net Zero Leaders Summit, Japan Business Conference 2021, towards a positive cycle of economic growth and environment protection. The Japanese government has formulated the Green Growth Strategy as an industrial policy to link positive cycle of economic growth and environment protection to the challenge of carbon neutrality by 2050, set forth by the SUGA administration in December 2020. This online summit aims to communicate the appeal of Japan's investment environment and efforts toward carbon neutrality. Today, we will proceed with the following agenda. Opening remarks. Welcome video message by the Prime Minister. Keynote speech by Mr. Masakazu TOKURA, Chairman of KEIDANREN, Japan Business Federation, titled Japanese Businesses, Initiatives Towards Carbon Neutrality. Panel Discussion 1, Green Innovation. Panel Discussion 2, Sustainable Finance. Panel Discussion 3, Transition in Emerging Countries. Video message by Mr. Hiroshi KAJIYAMA, Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry. We hope you will stay with us until the end. To start off the event, we will have opening remarks by Mr. Nobuhiko SASAKI, Chairman and CEO of JETRO.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you today at the Net Zero Leaders Summit. I am Nobuhiko SASAKI, Chairman of JETRO, the organizer of this event. In this summit, we will discuss a net zero path for the world. To achieve net zero, or the goal of carbon neutrality, we need to combine new ideas, technologies, funds, and know-how more than ever before. We are holding this summit as an opportunity to express Japan's commitments to realize this through international cooperation. In addition to the commitments made by the Japanese government, the world's leading industry leaders who will be speaking today will also share their visions and commitments toward carbon neutrality. To all of you participating today, in order to make net zero a reality, we also need the strong will and determination of each of you. Everyone from government and industry, from Japan and overseas, I hope we can work together to create a net zero world. With that, let's get started with the program.
Thank you, Mr. Sasaki. Next, we would like to show the welcome video message from Prime Minister of Japan, Yoshihide SUGA, for this Net Zero Leaders Summit.
内閣総理大臣の菅義偉です。本日、ネットゼロリーダーズサミットが開催されることを大変嬉しく思います。今ここ東京ではオリンピック競技大会が開催されています。万全な感染対策を講じ、安全・安心な大会を実現する決意です。世界が新型コロナという大きな困難に直面している今だからこそ、この東京大会では世界が団結し、人類の努力と英知によって難局を乗り越えていけることを世界に向けて発信していきたい、このように思います。またこれから開催されるパラリンピック大会を通じて、障害にある人もない人も、みんなが助け合って共に生きるという共生社会の実現に向けた心のバリアフリーの精神をしっかりと伝えていきます。そしてスポーツの力を通じて次の時代を生きる子どもたちに夢と感動を味わってほしいと考えています。このネットゼロリーダーズサミットにおいても新たな技術や市場を切り開いている世界トップレベルのリーダーの皆さんにお集まりをいただいています。オリンピックと同じく世界の人々に夢と希望を与えることができるよう ポストコロナ時代の未来の姿を活発に議論していただくことを期待しています。このイベントのテーマである脱炭素社会の実現は人類全体で取り組むべき待ったなしの課題です。そしてそのための対応は経済活動の制約ではなく、むしろ新たな投資やイノベーションを生み、経済を持続的に成長させる原動力にもなります。こうした思いで昨年私はこれまで行政の縦割りによって踏み込めなかった2050年カーボンニュートラルを決断しました。そしてこの長期目標と整合的で野心的な目標として2030年度において温室効果ガスを2013年度から46% 削減することを目指し、さらに 50% の高みに向け挑戦を続けていくことを表明しました。こうした目標を掲げることには慎重な意見もありましたが、しかし私は新たに創設した2兆円の基金や税制措置、規制改革など、あらゆる施策を総動員すれば、必ずや民間企業の大胆な発想とイノベーションが産業の変革と力強い成長を生み出すと信じています。日本は脱炭素の実現に向けて世界のリーダーシップを取る強い意志と高い能力を持っています。これから我が国における大きなグリーン市場への皆様の投資や協力を大いに歓迎いたします。このイベントが夢と希望のある未来に向けて日本と世界が共に進む契機となることを祈念しています。
Thank you, Prime Minister Suga. For the keynote speech, we are honored to welcome Mr. Masakazu TOKURA, Chairman of KEIDANREN, Japan Business Federation. He will talk about Japanese businesses, initiatives towards carbon neutrality. With pleasure, we present to you Mr. TOKURA.
I'm TOKURA, the chairman of KEIDANREN, Japan Business Federation. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk at NETZERO Leaders Summit. Historian Yuval Noah Harari said there are challenges that a single country alone cannot address, but demand global solutions. These are nuclear war, ecological collapse, and technological disruption. The theme of this summit, climate change, is one of major contributors to ecological collapse. In that context, it is significant that global leaders join together to discuss our common challenge to achieve carbon neutrality. I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this summit. Recent years, natural disasters and extreme weather such as heat waves, torrential rains, and large typhoons are frequently striking many places in Japan and overseas, bringing about devastating damage both physically and economically. The business community has a strong sense of crisis, as climate change is the largest threat that can overturn the foundation of our business activities. For example, CO2 concentration has already risen to over 400 ppm level from the pre-industrial level of 280 ppm. Climate change is at a critical stage that we must address it right now. Otherwise, the atmospheric CO2 concentration will continue to rise and likely to reach a tipping point where global warming will become totally unstoppable in the near future. We have no luxury of time in order to save our rich global environment for next generations. Under such circumstances, Prime Minister SUGA upholds broad targets to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and cut greenhouse gas emissions by 46% by 2030. Japan is tackling climate change both in the public and private sectors under Prime Minister's strong leadership through initiatives to generate a virtuous cycle of economy and environment. Needless to say, achieving carbon neutrality is a daunting challenge. We need a radical change in use of fossil fuel that dates back to the Industrial Revolution. Renew the industrial production process. Innovative products and services needs to be widely introduced, and our lifestyle needs to be transformed. We must drive green transformation that is a fundamental transformation of our economic society. As an enabler of technological development and implementation, the Japanese business community is spearheading green transformation in close cooperation with the government, academia, and citizens. We are committed to make our utmost efforts to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. As you may already know, Japan's private sector addresses climate change with the main driver of proactive efforts by business community. The NDC Japan submitted to the United Nations includes proactive efforts by businesses. This is because for a quarter century, KEIDANREN has been promoting countermeasures against climate change and achieving concrete results. Therefore, I'd like to share outcome of the Japanese business community's proactive efforts so far and our challenges towards green transformation. As we all know, the Kyoto Protocol was adopted at the COP3 in December 1997. Prior to that, KEIDANREN had formulated the Voluntary Action Plan on the Environment. In this action plan, KEIDANREN member organizations set their own CO2 reduction goals and make voluntary efforts to achieve their target through a PDCA cycle. These efforts brought about 12.1% emission reductions against 1990 level during the commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol from 2008 to 2012, significantly contributing to Japan's commitment set forth in the Kyoto Protocol. Even after the Kyoto Protocol's commitment period ended in 2012, KEIDANREN did not stop our voluntary efforts and formulated the commitment to a low-carbon society in 2013. Since then, we have been making steady progress in emissions reductions through a PDCA cycle. The latest achievement in 2019 was a 10.7% reduction against the 2013 level. Of course, the climate change is a global issue that cannot be solved by a single country, nor by corporations only focusing on CO2 reductions in their own business area. To that end, the commitment to a low-carbon society includes following 4 pillars to maximize reduction efforts. 1. Emissions reduction from domestic business operations. 2. Strengthening cooperation with other interested groups in the entire life cycle. 3. Promoting contribution at the international level through knowledge and technology transfer. 4. Development of innovative technologies to enable greater reductions in the future. Japan's aim to become carbon neutral by 2050 is increasingly drawing global attention and expectation. KEIDANREN places the top priority on achievement of carbon neutrality. Having revised the commitment to a low-carbon society to the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan to accelerate our proactive efforts. More specifically, businesses participating in this action plan illustrate their own vision to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, constantly review their emission reduction target to make a greater contribution to achieve the government's 2030 target. KEIDANREN will strongly push forward our carbon neutrality action plan through engagement with the government and citizens to maximize our efforts to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. It is clear that carbon neutrality cannot be achieved with extension of conventional measures. Businesses must be aware that climate change is a material management issue and keep driving innovations ever more aggressively. With this in mind, in December 2019, KEIDANREN announced Challenge Zero project to support businesses to advance their innovations. Businesses and organizations taking part in this project first declare innovation challenges that contribute to achievement of global carbon neutrality, then announce their concrete actions. There are 3 types of concrete actions as follows. 1. Development of innovative technologies. 2. Dissemination and implementation of such innovative technologies. 3. The financing companies that are engaged in the above challenges. We widely solicit KEIDANREN member companies and organizations to take part in Challenge Zero. Currently, over 180 members have announced more than 390 ambitious challenges, and the number is continuously on the rise. Special website for Challenge Zero carries innovation challenges of Japanese businesses. So please refer to details of their challenges in the website. I'm sure it will be a useful reference for those who are interested in innovations in the field of energy and climate change. KEIDANREN strongly promotes Challenge Zero, as we believe this initiative will change the game and create friendly competition of innovations. We are closely aligned with the Japanese government to carry forward Challenge Zero. For example, in October 2019, we started Zero Emissions Challenge in cooperation with METI. This project lists up companies taking innovative challenges to realize the carbon neutrality in order to provide their information to investors. This is a government industry initiative to encourage financial institutions and ESG investors in Japan and overseas to invest in businesses pursuing innovation through Challenge Zero. The Japanese government also established 2 trillion yen Green Innovation Fund to financially support companies' innovation challenges. This program provides long-term 10-year support for research and development of key technologies essential to realize carbon neutrality, such as hydrogen, renewable, and nuclear energies, EVs, and CCUS. The business community is determined to take innovation challenges by taking full advantage of support framework like this. Companies making efforts to realize carbon neutrality should be properly evaluated by financial institutions and ESG investors at home and overseas, and receive investments to accelerate their innovations. In order to create this virtuous cycle, not only support programs like Zero Emissions Challenge, but also proactive and effective disclosures by companies are indispensable. The most well-known framework for climate-related disclosures is TCFD recommendations made by TCFD or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures established by request from G20. Japan has the largest number of TCFD supporters in the world, with 428 institutions as of today. TCFD Consortium, sponsored by KEIDANREN, is a center place for pioneering activities, such as establishing guidelines to facilitate investment decisions by financial institutions and effective disclosures. The Japanese business community is building up best practices for disclosures based on TCFD recommendations and enhancing dialogues and engagement with financial institutions and investors in order to develop an environment to financially support challenges toward carbon neutrality. Last but not least, efforts to achieve carbon neutrality is absolutely challenging, but this is an inevitable issue for mankind. As I said at the beginning, climate change cannot be addressed by a single country, but requires concerted efforts among all nations in the world to protect the global environment, our social common capital, or global commons. The Japanese business community will continue our contribution in close cooperation with the government to achieve carbon neutrality through the initiatives introduced earlier, such as the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, the Challenge Zero, and climate-related disclosures. I would appreciate your kind understanding and support for the Japanese business community's initiatives. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Tokura. Next, we will have a panel discussion on the theme of green innovation. The panelists are Mr. Benoit Potier, Chairman and CEO of Air Liquide; Ms. Virginia M. Rometti, former Chairman, President, and CEO of IBM; Ms. Kathy Matsui, General Partner of Empower Partners. Joining us via video message is Mr. Henrik Andersen, President and CEO of Vestas Wind Systems. The panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Miki Tsusaka, Managing Director and Senior Partner of Boston Consulting Group. Over to you, Ms. Tsusaka.
We will now begin the Net Zero Leaders Summit. This first panel discussion will focus on green innovation. Hello, everyone. My name is Miki Tsusaka, a Managing Director and Senior Partner of the Boston Consulting Group. I'm both honored and excited today to moderate this important session. First, I'd like to welcome the panelists for this session, all of whom require little or no introduction, as they are global leaders in their sectors and bring great expertise and passion on today's green innovation topic. A warm welcome to Mr. Benoit Potier, Chairman and CEO of Air Liquide, who also serves as co-chair of the Hydrogen Council worldwide; Ms. Ginny Rometti, former Chairman, President, and CEO of IBM; Ms. Kathy Matsui, former Vice Chair of Goldman Sachs Japan, and co-founder and general partner of Empower Partners. We've also interviewed Mr. Henrik Andersen, President and CEO of Vestas Wind Systems, whose remarks will be shared as part of this group discussion as well. So let's begin. Green innovation, arguably one of the most important things that need to happen right now as we imagine a net zero world. All of you have been playing an important part in encouraging innovative efforts combined with technology to make carbon neutrality a reality. I'd like to ask each of you to comment on what those strategies are and how you make it happen. So the first topic of discussion, what are indeed each of your thoughts around carbon neutral strategies? Let me share a video message from Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson of Vestas describes his strategic pillars for a carbon neutral society as a global leader in the wind turbine business.
First of all, thank you. I think the pleasure is all ours to be invited to participate in this panel. Miki-san, I will just here also like to honor and also appreciate the Japanese government, MITI, and not least Mogi-san, the General Director General in MITI, for the opportunity to participate. We are truly one of the global leaders in renewable energy and have been that for 4 decades. I also think here we all now appreciate that we have reached a part where renewable energy has to be part of the building blocks in energy source for our society going forward. Energy is vital, both for the generations that are picking up education, but also for our whole society to keep expanding in our lives, whether we live in the current countries we are in, or potentially also embarking on it in some of the newer societies coming in. We think large-scale deployment of renewable energy is super important. That is also why we are excited about to see how Japan is now embarking on a journey where carbon neutrality becomes 2050 goal. It's a very ambitious target, but we also want to volunteer and put Vestas forward as one of the Japanese government strategic tools to realize that ambition. I think it's important in that journey that we appreciate that the low-cost renewable energy, electricity is only 20% of the energy consumption today. So we will have to do more in electrification. That means electrification of transport, electrification of industry, and not least also how we can continue electrifying all around the renewables. It's also important that we are driving an increased deployment of renewable energy. Let's not forget that only around 9% of the global electricity generation today is based on the renewable, either a combination of wind and solar. So that we also have to pick up in the coming decades. Last, I'm honored a little bit to talk about Power-to-X and hydrogen in a Japanese context. I think you were the first ones that tried to convince the world to embark on the hydrogen fuel 20 years ago. And I think the world is now probably accepting that you were right. And now we're all embarking into the P2X journey. And we believe that will be a very, very important tool for industries around the world. So I will just finish on that one, just say we are really looking forward to help work closely with the Japanese government, your leader, Prime Minister SUGA, and also MITI in localizing when it comes to Japan and on the renewable transition we are embarking on.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Potier, over to you now to describe Air Liquide's strategic pillars towards a carbon neutral society. You've been very engaged in decarbonization in your sector as a leading industrial gas company. Perhaps focusing on the hydrogen business, can you share your thinking on some specific and innovative technologies and solutions that you're working on? Mr. Potier?
Yes, thank you very much. If I may start with what I call a carbon neutral society and when is it possible in general. I think we can have a carbon neutral society if we can collectively address 5 issues, essentially. Number 1 is a smart energy mix. The energy mix today is changing, and we need a sound energy mix that can fulfill the needs of both the planet and the citizens. Referring to renewables, solar, wind, bio, nuclear in some countries, gas with CCS, and many others, which really raise the point of acceptability of those renewables to people. That's one. The second one is a fair carbon price. Mechanism that needs to be put in place needs to lead to a sort of carbon corridor with a floor and a cap, which is not yet the case. So there's a role for the states to play. The third one is a real an accelerated decarbonization path amongst many industries that would allow a sort of transition phase for probably the next 15 years and leading to really low, very low carbon industries. So it is to really address the issue of CCS. The number 4 is a faster development and deployment of hydrogen technologies. And I'm sure we're going to talk about them in different markets. And finally, I would say the complementary role of the financial sector. So those are the 5 issues that we need to address if we want to have a carbon neutral technology. Now, let me just come back to hydrogen. The hydrogen momentum has grown tremendously and worldwide. We have now 30 countries that have announced hydrogen strategies. We have 75 countries representing about 80% of world GDP that have announced net zero emission strategies, and more than 350 projects around the world, representing about $150 billion of investment. So really there's a new momentum in hydrogen. What we need is scaling up. What we need is public policies, sound public policies that help reduce the cost differential with the existing cost today. Sort of cost parity, and we think the cost parity with fossil fuels is achievable in a reasonable time frame. The only missing point, and I will probably stop there right now, is the availability of renewable energy. I think we do not have enough renewable energy, and when we account for that, we see there is an issue. So I will just stop there to describe what we need and where we are in hydrogen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gauthier. 5 things: hydrogen and renewables and the shortage of that. Ms. Rometty, let me pose the same question to you. IBM has, of course, been a leader in the digital world, and you've led from the front to marry good tech principles with practical applications everywhere. How do you think about carbon neutral strategies, and what specific solutions is IBM working on?
Thank you, Miki-san. And just as Benoit really talked about this at a society level, let me add to the conversation by talking about it from an individual company level. And I'd start with just a couple comments on the past, as I think it informs the future. So for IBM, believe it or not, it was 50 years ago that we had our first policy on the environment and its protection. So it's clear it's always been a long-term initiative to us, and it's weathered good cycles, bad cycles in business, ups and downs in the economy. And frankly, we focused on it when it was not popular as a topic. And so a few of the milestones, when I go back in time, so not only was that 50 years ago, the first policy, it was 1973 that we had our first program to manage energy, 75, our first conservation goal. It was 1994 when we actually started doing our public reporting. We may be one of the longest public reporting companies on this topic. 2000, our first CO2 emission reduction goal, and then we've had many more since that time. And then in 2020, we reached our most current goal 5 years ahead of time. So all I say that for is to bring us to, so what do you do going forward? And it was February of 2021 that we announced a couple points. One, that we would reach as a company net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. We would procure, into the topic that Benoit was just talking about, 75% of our electricity as renewables by 2025 and 90% by 2030. But maybe what I can share that from a company perspective is our philosophy behind that, and so on, and what you do. So my first comment is, though, the first thing to do is to conserve versus look at how to remove. And obviously the most environmentally friendly thing to do is don't consume it to begin with. And in many ways, it's been ingrained in us. It's the idea of when you build a product, instead of trying to reduce the cost of maintenance, you try to build something that doesn't need maintenance. And it's the same philosophy here. So first order is to conserve. The second philosophy would be to aggressively procure renewables. Now, we did our first renewables in 2001, believe it or not, and we're at 65% now. My third comment in philosophy is about being transparent and authentic. And so as an example, we don't use unbundled renewable energy certificates, RECs. We would not consider the purchase of carbon offsets as a way to achieve our reduction. And then the last point I'd make is that you have to bring it alive every day in what you do through your products, your research, and how you work with clients. And as an example, we've got a very interesting project going on with Yara. They would make nutrition for crops farming. And it's a platform that does everything around water conservation, fertilizers, et cetera. So you bring it alive through what you do in the industry. So that would be our philosophy, those 4 points.
Excellent. 50 years. Wow. So 2030, I'm sure you'll get there, or perhaps you'll break the record and get there sooner. Next up is Ms. Matsui. We have heard some great strategies by corporate leaders from around the world towards achieving their goal of a carbon neutral world in their companies and society at large. Let me ask you this, as someone that's operated, of course out of Japan, but always on a global stage, I wonder if you can comment on both public and private strategies and technologies that you see unfolding here in Japan today.
Sure. So I would say in a nutshell, Japan is moving in the right direction, but it's still got a very long way to go. As many of you know, Japan depends on fossil fuels for 90% of its energy needs. And while it has been one of the more energy efficient developed economies in the world, that very high dependency means it is still a great cause of the CO2 emissions globally. And so finally, belatedly, in my personal view, the Japanese government announced a carbon neutrality goal to be reached by 2050, which will require reducing fossil fuel usage by as much as 48% by the year 2030. Alongside this, the government announced a green growth strategy, which includes a 2 trillion yen green fund to promote innovative R&D and CapEx, tax incentives to promote new innovations, financial support, regulatory reform to facilitate the development of new technologies, and finally, stronger international collaboration. They're targeting many areas for innovation, including offshore wind, hydrogen, nuclear development, transportation, new mobility systems, electric vehicles, residential and commercial conservation methods as well. But in my personal view, to really spur green innovation, the government's role is very limited. It really, at the end of the day, has to allow and promote private sector with incentives on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then to ensure that no constraints are placed on the private sector on how those reductions are actually achieved. I think that going back to Mr. Portier's earlier comments, what Japan, in my personal view, could do to really accelerate this process is, for example, mandate disclosure requirements of climate risks for companies. I know the UK's Bank of England is starting to do this in the UK, and this could be something to spur faster and accelerated progress here in Japan. We also need greater financial support. I said 2 trillion yen, there's a 2 trillion yen green fund. That is 1/100th that of the 2 trillion yen green infrastructure fund that the US government is planning to pursue. So still very, very small scale. And finally, removing regulatory barriers, I think, is also of utmost priority. But I think the direction is clear. It's moving in a positive way, but still has to be accelerated in the next few years. Otherwise, it won't be reached.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm glad we're headed in the right direction. Those are sobering statistics. I fully agree with you, and I think others have already commented on the importance of transparency, disclosure, and making all of this come out so we can all visibly track those goals and move forward together. I'd now like to move to the next question for all of you on how then you make such strategies a reality and ensure the strategies really come to life especially given the 2030 goals that many have already committed to, which feels increasingly just around the corner? Here are remarks from Mr. Anderson of Vestas on this question. I asked Mr. Anderson how he plans to achieve the goals of carbon neutrality within the walls of Vestas and also broader partnerships and ecosystems. Let's have a look.
Yeah, first of all, it's something where I've been now, first I was a non-executive director with Vestas since 2013. I will say probably some of the most rewarding things we have seen in our journey has been the last 10 years in the industry. In the last 10 years in the industry, we have reduced levelized cost of energy of wind with nearly 2/3. It also meant when we look back to 2010, we were basically depending on subsidies in 90% of the world markets. Today, it's the complete opposite. We don't rely on subsidies anymore. And that means we have removed, I think, one of the most probably upsetting factor discussing renewable energy, the financial factor. So today, politicians and global leaders can take that active decision. And I will just say, if we look at it and compare it, if we invest $10 million in fossil or existing fuel sources, we generally create 15 permanent jobs. If we invest $10 million in renewable, we create somewhere around 70 to 75 permanent green jobs. And I think the generation to come after us would expect us to leverage that ratio for the future. So for us, we very much believe in that this is a global business, but it also requires a lot of local ownership, both in terms of developing the technology. All countries, all areas are to some extent different. So therefore, we adjust and we establish ourselves locally. In this case, we have a very, very strong partnership. One of our largest shareholders is MHI, and I have Ken-san Osumui Kentaro, Ken-san between me and him on my board as one of my board members. So we actually work very closely in establishing that. We can't do that alone. So we rely heavily on establishing local partnerships, both on components, but also at a later stage on the local partnerships when it comes to manufacturing. Especially in Japan, we have, together with the METI and the government, developed and outlined a Vision 2040, which of course relies on that we have visibility of the auctions and the transition happening in Japan. On the other hand, the government in Japan can then count on our commitment of being local manufacturing footprint and taking some of the young people coming out from technology and universities into our journey as well. As a large company, we have launched similar, that we will become carbon neutral in 2030, and we will have a complete circularity in 2040. I was insisting on that originally when we start talking about it, everyone were talking 2040, and I had to say, it sounds very wrong. I'm more than 50 years old, and I don't think I'll be around in 2040 so it felt very much that we were passing something on to the next level of leaders, rather than saying on the carbon neutrality for Vestas, it's 2030, because I need to get that done. So that is very much how we think, and probably also lead a little bit towards a question which is what do we do as large corporations to help governments and political leaders making it happen? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Portier, can you now share your response to the how question? How do you make all of this happen in and around Air Liquide and beyond to accelerate the set of transformations you discussed earlier?
I think everything starts with objectives. You need to have good objectives, and I think there's no surprise that Air Liquide has ambitious objectives, which were, by the way, presented to the market this year in 2021 under a Sustainability Day. So number one, carbon neutral by 2050, which is the goal. Midterm, we have set an objective of reducing by 1/3 our absolute CO2 emissions by 2035. And before that, in 2025, we need to see our absolute emissions decrease. which is not yet the case because we have a sort of accumulation of projects, growth projects, that will translate into more CO2 emissions. So everything starts with the objectives. Then we have, on the how, we have an internal strategy on 3 points. One is the assets. We need to convert 100% of our assets, production plants, transportation, the way we handle our products everywhere, the way we distribute our products, we sell. So we have initiated a certain number of programs around our assets, number one. Number two is customers. We need to help our customers to decarbonize their own industries. And this is a very important part of our business. And so far, we've been pretty successful in talking to a certain number of sectors about how to achieve that. And number three is to actually work in ecosystems, because alone we cannot be successful. So assets, customers, and ecosystem, that's the ACE strategy. Now, a word on technologies. We are a technology company, so we are working on many different fields. On production first, we will improve the existing technologies, the so-called SMR and ATR technologies, to increase the efficiency and reduce the emissions. So that's just an immediate action. Then we'll work, and we are working already, on electrolysis technology. There are actually 4 big ways of electrolyzing water. There's one which is well known, a second one that has been introduced, and 2 that are already in the labs. So we will continue working on R&D to make the most efficient technologies emerge. We work on liquefaction of hydrogen, because this is really a key core competence of Air Liquide. We are working also on transportation and storage. My idea is that in the future, we should be able to store hydrogen in the pocket. As simple as that, in a sort of sponge. And there are materials that allow that. And Japan, by the way, is well advanced in this type of technology. And finally, we are also working on the CCS or CCU technologies, so carbon capture and usage, or carbon capture and sequestration. So an internal strategy with assets, customers, ecosystems, and a very deep work on technologies. That's the how. And with that, we think we'll be able to make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Potier. Hydrogen in a pocket. I will remember that one, amongst the many other things you've talked about in terms of what you're doing at Air Liquide, the partnerships, and of course, importantly, the ecosystem that you operate under. Ms. Rometty, same question to you. What are your thoughts on how to make all of what you talked about happen within the walls of a company, the partnerships and ecosystems? Same question. Look forward to your response.
Thank you. And I'll speak to a number of the technologies, just as Benoit also mentioned. But when you speak about how, I would suggest that there are 3 principles when it comes to technology innovation that every company could adopt that would accelerate the usage of technology innovation in the whole area of carbon neutrality. So the first one would be to embrace what I would call an open technology ecosystem. And in some ways it's obvious, because without it, you can't harness data, and it's in so many different places. You'll never pull it all together. And we already all very well understand that if we can pull it together, we can achieve some much greater things than we can individually. Now that needs technology-wise an open cloud platform and a hybrid cloud. And some examples of that would be the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. So here's where they're creating a virtual single source of data across many different companies across 6 different continents. They've raised $1.5 billion to do this. And this is all around, I think we don't realize there's 200 million tons of waste in landfills, 8 million in our oceans, as an example of just plastics. Or in Europe, we're doing work with the electronic grid operators, and that's blockchain in this case. And it's to balance supply and demand, as an example. Now, that's this idea that you can't do any of this without an open platform underneath this for the ecosystem. The second principle I would suggest is that you've got to do something to break down barriers that you can have strong collaboration. Because actually fragmentation is probably the greatest enemy to us achieving what we need to achieve here. And so therefore to have integration, you really want to integrate between the consumers and the producers, which is obvious. And so as an example, in Japan, I think one of the very good initiatives is called the Advanced Semiconductor Manufacturing Technology Consortium. Now, this is hosted by, in Japan, the National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology. And it's all about jointly then developing some of these technologies with the government. It's just one example of many work Mitsubishi Heavy Industries is doing, which is about a platform that would use, again, a digital platform that you could visualize what you have for the capture, the utilization, and the storage of energy. So just an example. And then the third principle that I would end on that I think applies to everyone is this idea to focus on trust, because you will never accelerate the adoption of new technology if people do not trust it. And so many of these systems, as we've just discussed already in this panel, are rapidly digitized, and many will use artificial intelligence. But the biggest inhibitor to AI is people trusting that data. And by the way, AI will have a great use. I mean, we're doing it with polymer membranes to separate out carbon dioxide from flue gases, but you've got to trust the data and have principles around that. So the idea of an open technology platform, the second being radical collaboration, and the third being focusing on the trust of these technologies, the underpinning elements of why you trust them.
Thank you, Ms. Mermetti. 3 principles, very compelling and very convincing. Let me now move back to Ms. Matsui. Over to you with a slightly modified question. The others have just talked about how individual companies and their sectors are activating their efforts. Ms. Mermetti has just talked about 3 principles. Bringing the conversation back to Japan, I would love to hear your perspectives on what you see as strengths versus gaps in terms of how Japanese corporates are approaching green innovation in general.
Absolutely. So before I get to Japan, I just wanted to maybe set some context in terms of the opportunity for companies globally in the space of what I call broadly clean tech and green innovation. My former colleagues at Goldman estimate that clean tech has the potential to drive 16 trillion US dollars of green infrastructure and investments, and potentially could create 15 to 20 million new jobs around the world by 2030. By the way, of the $16 trillion, renewables would account for about 7 of the 16 trillion. So clearly an enormous opportunity in what we are living in, a low growth world. For Japan, this carbon neutral society also represents a tremendous business opportunity, of course, for Japanese corporations, which, as we know, have had a long history of developing energy saving technologies, just given how resource poor the nation is. And if I think about your question about what are some of the strengths, Mr. Portier talked about hydrogen. This is an area that Japan has had a leading edge in developing the science, fuel cell technologies. I think the infrastructure is still a work in progress, but the government in its latest basic energy plan is really prioritizing hydrogen very strongly. Second is with mobility and transportation, lithium ion batteries. We know a lot of the early batteries that went into the Tesla came from Japan. And there's just a lot more potential for growth, be it solar or wind, which the government's also going to be emphasizing to manage those supply-demand fluctuations. There's going to be huge demand for lithium-ion batteries. Offshore wind infrastructure, as well as next-generation electric vehicles, just to name a few other examples. However, in terms of the gaps that I see a few. Number one, Ms. Rometti put her finger exactly on the point that Japan still needs a lot of work on, which is this open innovation ecosystem. I think Japan still suffers from this disease of siloed academia, private sector, and the government, and we absolutely need to break those barriers down if we are truly going to maximize the potential of green innovation for the economy. So that's point number one. Point number two is scalability. I'm running a venture capital fund right now. We're coming across some really exciting technologies, but getting them from a really exciting idea to commercializing is quite a different matter. So how do we, and it's not a country lacking of capital, right? It's got a huge amount of cash sitting under the futon, but how do we deploy that capital in the right way so that these companies can scale, not just scale domestically, but scale globally? And then I would say, finally, going back to my disclosure point earlier, only 40% of the Nikkei 225 index companies actually have carbon neutral goals or targets set. That's way too low compared to the global average. So again, we really need a push, I think, from the government. We're already seeing it from shareholders to move faster on that front of transparency. So strengths, but still challenges ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Matsui, for the push. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your ideas, actions, and commitment to green innovation across such a diverse set of businesses, sectors, and economies that you all spoke so compellingly about. Be great now if we do a closing round of thoughts on the discussion we just had towards a net zero and greener world, and your messages perhaps to the corporate leaders around the world that embrace this shared goal as well. Here are Mr. Anderson's remarks. Please have a look.
Yeah, and I apologize always upfront when I answer this question a little bit, because I know I might upset a few of my colleagues in large corporations around the world, but I think it's about doing what you say you do. So in some countries we call it walk the talk, or talk the walk you do as a large corporation. I think we are obliged to do that. Otherwise, I hope the future generation will come back and remind me personally that I didn't do what I was talking about. Because if I look at it, the large corporations, we have 29,300 people working for Vestas. And if you want a vehicle that is named Vestas on today, it will have to be a hybrid or an electric vehicle. Why is that? Because if we continue down the path of keep talking about it and not having the decision, then we will never make it happen. And to give that example is a lot of leaders around the world are using the not yet built out infrastructure as the argument for not making the decision on behalf of your employees. We say it differently. We have now chargers at every location where Vestas works around the world with factories and others. That means if you cannot drive up and have your car recharged at our factory or office locations, then of course it's me that is the holding back. So for us, we also said to anyone, guests, people in the community, you can swipe your charging card and then you can charge your cars at our locations as well, either outside normal office hours. This is sort of just an example of saying, I really think that large corporates will have to play their part in providing, being part of the building out the infrastructure, but then also sticking to that we have the values to say to a large group, not only our employees, but it's also the families of the employees and the relatives of the employees that see what is actually the right thing to do. Maybe 10, 20, even 50 years from now, what is it for a society we would like? So therefore, we are very much relying on that. The other thing we also do is we don't know everything. So we invite very obviously to open partnerships. We invite to technology sharing partnerships where trusted partners will share development. One of the things, and we are having a little bit of successes right now, 2 years ago, everyone was super nervous for announcing that we could be running a full circularity and recyclability of the blades.
Yes.
Today, we can say we have 3 very good examples of that running globally with local partners. I know for sure Vestas can maybe only aspire to maybe hold and part of the ownership in one of these successful startups, but I can promise that some of those startups, if they're really successful, they will be as big companies as Vestas in itself, because then will be one of the leading companies doing the recyclability of blades, which is becoming a more and more imminent challenge to solve for the whole industry, and also for a political leader that says yes to renewable. She wants to know that they can rely on that it's truly renewable as such. I think that's what inspires me tremendously, because we have one of the most renewable and one of the most sustainable products. One of our turbines is carbon neutral from 4 months of life, and it's expected to last for 30 years. So a little bit we are blessed from the beginning, but we will try to make those 4 months down to basically day one. That's the whole spirit of what we believe in investors. Thank you.
Mr. Potier, your closing comments, please.
Yes, maybe my first comment will be on long-term. There is no long-term performance without first good economic performance today. And I think that's the starting point. And that's only if you have them that you can project yourself and think about the long term. So the combination of financial performance and sustainability performance is actually key for the future. And we in Air Liquide, we actually base all our long-term plans on the combination of the two. We cannot just ignore either one or the other. That's my first remark. The second thing is about the roles that we have to play. We have the private sector, we have governments, and we have citizens, to make it very simple. The first thing we need to assure is that companies deliver. We have taken commitments. We need to deliver. We need to deliver in financial performance, but also in technologies, in sustainability objectives. And unless we are able to deliver, we are not going to be credible and things are not going to happen. So that's my first statement. We have our own homework. The second one is governments. Governments have a very important role to play, not to replace the private sector, of course, but to set up the regulatory framework to help the private sector to invest. So to play really a guiding role in the way the system is going to evolve. I was mentioning earlier the CO2 price. There's no way we as companies can set up a CO2 price. So the mechanism that needs to be put in place by government is very important. So everyone has a role to play. We have to go not alone, but in partnerships between companies, but between R&D, academics, and private sector, but also between private sector and governments. So this is why we as a Hydrogen Council have tried to play that role to gather as many sectors as we could and talk to governments so that we have the best regulations in the future. And finally, I think we need to also integrate citizens in what we do, because they will play a role. Either they accept this new world or not. And back to Virginia's point about trust, I think if we don't have the trust from citizens, nothing will happen. So it's also up to us to create that trust, not alone, but with the full ecosystem. That would be my concluding remark.
Thank you so much, Mr. Potier. Ms. Rometty, over to you.
I would close this panel, I think, with my 3 points I'd make to my business colleagues. The first one would be, do not look at this topic as a corporate social responsibility imperative, that this is a long-term strategic business imperative. And like any other imperative you've had in the business, you'd set goals and you'd raise the bar every year and you'd achieve them and you would publish them and you'd keep moving forward. That'd be point one. Point two, I believe you should be very transparent and authentic. Now, I used the word trust earlier. I've always said that trust is a company's license to operate that society gives it. And so in such, to build trust, one way you can do it is to take a clear stand on something and then articulate it, but take a clear stand on something that matters to society. So just recently, we were very clear about supporting putting a price on carbon, on a particular plan that we would endorse, very clear that it would be the Climate Leadership Council's plan around this topic, but clarity on what you believe and be authentic about it. And then my third and last point would be that this now, every leader, every industry needs to respond. I think this was a topic that for a very long time, people felt the few could carry the many. And that's really no longer true. And I participated as one of the creators of something the Business Roundtable did called the Purpose of Corporation. Some people reduced that to stakeholder capitalism. But we talked about, in addition to shareholders, whether it's employees, society, communities, your clients, and of course, obviously underpinning all that is everybody has a stake in the planet. And therefore, this is all of our responsibilities.
Thank you, Ginny, or Ms. Rometty. Thank you, Ms. Rometty. CSR, authenticity, and of course, that it is everyone's responsibility. Really appreciate your thoughts. Last but not least, Ms. Matsui. Your closing comment, please.
Thank you. I'll close with two. First of all, I think this climate crisis that we're all experiencing is a true crisis. But at the same time, I'm telling corporate leaders, government leaders here in Japan, that it also represents a once-in-a-generation business opportunity. But to make this opportunity a reality requires the successful development and implementation of innovative, clean technologies that will require both government leadership as well as aggressive corporate investment. And my last comment is, while it all sounds so scary and impossible, I remain optimistic for the following reason. If I talk to my children who are in their early 20s or other Gen Xers, young people, I'm heartened by the fact that they are so passionate about their future, about this planet, and what they think needs to happen for this world to be sustainable, that much more than my generation, they really, really care. And therefore, what does that mean for employers? That means maybe you don't think the environment is directly, impacting you. You just use energy, but it's not your main business. No. Those people who are going to either choose you as a place to work or not choose you will be asking you that question. What is your impact on the environment? How are you managing those risks? These are front and center, top of mind questions that young recruits and employees will be asking. So if you want to be the employer of choice, this to me is absolutely integral in your, as Ms. Rometty pointed out, your business core strategy. But because I feel this magna of momentum, of passion amongst this youth generation, I'm very excited about what that means for the future of this climate and clean tech opportunity that we face going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Matsui. I'm very excited as well. I was so excited, I think I misphrased what I meant to say to Ms. Rometty, which is it's not about CSR. It is about authenticity, and it is about all of us taking responsibility, not only as leaders, but for the next generation to come. So thank you. Thank you all for sharing your thoughtful insights and passions with us today. The world has a ways to get to net zero, but it's great to hear from leaders like yourselves that are at the leading edge of this dialogue. I was really struck by the really wide array at the depth of the arsenal of innovations, technologies, philosophies, resources, ecosystems you all spoke about across very different value chains, but also a strong commonality of your convictions and your commitment to make sure this all happens in an accelerated way for your companies and society at large. I've been energized by your energy and drive, and trust the audience feels that way as well. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Potier, and Ms. Rometty and Matsui for this very important discussion today. Thank you.
For our next session, we will have a panel discussion on sustainable finance. The panelists for this session are Ms. Fiona Reynolds, CEO of PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment, Mr. Jose Ricardo Fagon de Forni, Chief Financial and Investor Relations Officer of Banco do Brasil S.A., Mr. Kanetsugu Mike, Member of the Board of Directors, Chairman of Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group, Mr. Alberto De Paoli, Chief Financial Officer of NLSPA. The panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Tamao Sasada, Country Executive for Japan, Bank of America. Over to you, Ms. Sasada.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this panel discussion in sustainable finance. My name is Tamao Sasada, Country Executive for Bank of America in Japan. Today, I'm honored to be joined by senior leaders from around the world. Ms. Fiona Reynolds, CEO of PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment. Mr. Ricardo Forni, CFO of Bank of Brazil. Mr. Alberto Di Paoli, CFO of Enel of Italy. And Mr. Kanesugu Mike, Chairman of Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. Our four speakers are not only well-respected leaders in their business fields, but they're also pioneers in sustainable finance, which is a key component of the net zero transition. Finance is an important aspect in achieving sustainable society. With our speakers coming from different regions and industries, today would be a great opportunity to hear progress in sustainable finance around the world and some of the changes required as transition accelerates in coming years. Without further ado, let me jump into the first topic. So, first of all, I would like to ask all leaders to share their initiatives and challenges to date on sustainable finance. So let me start with PRI. Fiona, I understand.
Sorry.
Hi. Okay, so I understand that PRI has been promoting sustainable finance by encouraging investors to incorporate ESG into their investment decisions. I know that you now have over 3,500 signatories to the PRI principles. So can you tell us why the PRI has been so successful in pushing this initiative forward in the investment community? And how do you think investor behaviors have changed over time?
Well, thanks, Tommaso, and thanks for having me here today. It's a good question. Just maybe for those that aren't familiar with the PRI, just really quickly. So we were formed in 2006 out of the UN system by a small but committed group of 86 asset owners who were really aiming to bring sustainability to capital markets. And today we now have, we're actually over 4,000 signatories to our 6 principles. And they collectively represent 121 trillion US. And this includes 94 signatories in Japan. So over the past 15 years, we've really been working hard to bring responsible investment into the mainstream arena. And while it's been a long road, I do have to say that each year we've seen more and more momentum with a real leap in the last 5 years. Also, in the wake of the pandemic, we've seen increasing recognition from investors that issues such as climate change, human rights abuses, and inequitable social structures seriously really threaten the long-term performance of economies, investors' portfolios, and the world into which, of course, their clients and their beneficiaries live. So really, investors' understanding of both environmental and governance indicators and their materiality has really improved, and investors have also, really moved to integrate those indicators into risk analysis and screening. So we've just kept working away. I think that's why we've been successful, and we've been developing the practice. In terms of what I've seen, what still needs to happen, what's yet to be done, I talked just about the environmental issues and the governance issues, but I would say that social performance considerations, or the S in ESG, have often really still been missed as either immaterial or less a priority for many. But I think COVID-19 has really shown us the interconnectedness of issues, and it's demonstrated the materiality of social issues, human rights issues. And really from the investor perspective, from our signatories' perspective, we've never seen them so engaged on social issues. And we hope that this is something that's here to stay. Really as an organisation by and for signatories, our role is to provide investors with the tools, the guidance, the reporting structures to actually know, how do I go about
incorporating ESG factors. It's one thing to talk about sustainability, but how do you actually do it? And that's where we come in. I also think because we've got such a big, broad signatory base, it also gives us legitimacy and credibility to engage with policymakers. And we've certainly seen that sustainability is really increasingly being included in financial regulation. So we've really come a long way since 2006. And it's sort of taken 15 years for responsible investment to truly enter the mainstream. But we still have a long way to go if we're going to shape a more sustainable, green and just future. So we've come a long way, but there's a lot more that needs to be done until we can really say that responsible investment is integrated into all portfolios.
That's excellent, Fiona. Thank you so much. So now let me ask Ricardo. Ricardo, we understand that Bank of Brazil is ranked number 3 in the 2021 Global 100 Index. So that makes you one of the top 3 most sustainable companies in the world. So can you tell us some of the highlights of your achievements? And also, we understand that one of the main customer sectors for Bank of Brazil is agricultural. But Brazil is also an industrial country and it's rich in natural resources. So how do you engage with those sectors from a sustainable finance perspective?
Okay, Fiona, thanks. First, I'd like to thank the organizer of this event for inviting Banco do Brasil. It's an honor to speak together with such distinct speakers at this panel. For us at Banco do Brasil, it's a great pride to be acknowledged by market indexes, rankings, and global ratings as one of the most sustainable banks in the world, like the Corporate Knights Global 100 ranking. In this regard, it's important to highlight that Banco do Brasil has a long track record on the subject and has been integrating for many years the ESG aspects into our corporate strategy and into our administrative and business practices. I would like to highlight some of our initiatives that has contributed to our performance. We have a sustainability governance in place. Since 2005, we have had a sustainability plan that has 40 actions and 110 KPIs effective until 2023 and is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This year, we went further, establishing 10 long-term sustainability commitments with goals to be implemented by 2030, which involve 3 work fronts: sustainable businesses, responsible investment, and ESG management. We also have allocated 261 billion reais in sectors of the green and inclusive economy, which is considered the largest portfolio of sustainable business in the Brazilian financial system, with a growth of 16% in 12 months, mainly due to its performance in sustainable agriculture and social businesses. As the main financer of agribusiness in Brazil and supporter of the sector throughout all the stages of its production chain, we have achieved a balance of approximately 100 billion reais in low carbon agriculture and good social and environmental practices. But we want more. We intend to reach 125 billion in sustainable agriculture by 2025. In addition to providing farmer customers with solutions to help preserve the environment and reduce carbon emissions, our business also brings social benefits. This agenda is very important for Brazil and is in line with our commitment to eliminating social inequalities. We provide specific credit lines to support family farmers and rural producers in sustainable forest management projects and in adequacy of recovery of degraded areas or areas of permanent preservation. We seek also to help our clients from all sectors of the economy to transition to a more sustainable portfolio and engage in ESG practices. Our sustainable business portfolio comprises the financing of activities and segments to have a positive social and environmental impacts, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, construction, sustainable transportation and tourism, water, fishing, forestry, sustainable agriculture, and waste management. And this is based on a methodology developed by the Brazilian Federation of Banks and following our sustainable finance framework. prepared in accordance with the main international standards. I think that's it for this question.
Thank you, Ricardo. That's great. So now let me ask Sugu of MUFG. So Sugu, in May this year, MUFG announced its carbon neutral declaration, which is a commitment to achieve net zero emission in your finance portfolio by 2050 and your own operation by 2030. You're the first Japanese bank to have announced such a commitment, which is really encouraging. So would you be able to tell us about MUFG's sustainable finance initiatives in light of the current situation in Japan?
Well, thank you, Tamao, and thank you very much for inviting me to this summit. First of all, regarding today's main theme, net zero, I'm extremely encouraged by the fact that the Japanese government has declared its commitment to achieve carbon neutrality. Showcasing this bold new dimension of Japan's investing environment today is a powerful act. A quick refresher on my company. MUFG is a GSIB, one of the world's largest financial groups, with more than $3 trillion of total assets and a global network with 2,600 locations in more than 50 nations. Our core is commercial banking based on mid to long-term, high-touch client relationships, and we offer a wide menu of financial services, including trust banking and securities. MUFG has a cumulative target by the year 2030 of around $350 billion of financing that supports a sustainable society. This emphasis is not new. We've been a major finance force in renewable energy and ranked among the top players in the global league table for a very long time. Now we are taking it a step further. To increase the level and the speed of our measures to address climate change, in May, we pledged to support global decarbonization by achieving a net zero emission in our finance portfolio by 2050 and in our own operations by 2030. That said, we cannot reach net zero through our finance emissions on our own. Divestment may be one way to achieve this, but that in itself will not necessarily lead to carbon neutrality in the society as a whole, nor be MUFG's options as a leading bank. Our focus is for all our clients and Japan as a nation to achieve decarbonization as a whole. In the process, balance with the economy is a key, and a stable power supply is a prerequisite for sustainable economy. In Japan, we have issues like resuming nuclear power operations, geographical constraints to renewable energy, and the difficulty of sharing electricity with our countries because we are surrounded by water. So it is also important to support our clients' transition to green, in addition to supporting technology innovations to decarbonize. And for Japan, it is particularly important to support companies who want to turn green, even if they are considered brown at present. The key is to provide financial support for the massive capex required for changing industrial structures, and this will be a significant business opportunity for MUFG.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sugu. That was great. So now let me turn to Enel. So Alberto, for Enel, you are a front runner in the global energy sector in terms of transitioning from fossil fuel to renewable energy. You've also been a pioneer in sustainable finance because we know you issued the world's first sustainable linked bond in 2019. So can you share how sustainable finance has actually helped you with your transition?
Well, good morning and thank you for the question. Yeah, so we invented this new instrument in 2019. So I give you some color about this invention and so the historical situation at the time. We decided to change completely our business model in 2015 and turning our business model into a full sustainable business model, and pretending to find in this U-turn so economical reasons, strong economical reasons to have it, to have this change, and it's something that we found along the path. So at the time, this company worth 35 billion euros. Today is 80 billion euros after 5 years, and this is the half of this value is explained from the choice. We decided to have a sustainable finance supporting this transition, but at that time we had only one instrument in the market. It was the green bonds. And we issued 3.5 billion euros of green bonds. But after this, we asked ourselves if another instrument may offer different solutions for a full sustainable company like us. And we didn't find any instrument in the market. So we were seeking for an instrument not related to projects and related to the strategy and purpose of a company that may cost less than the normal bond, because sustainability has to be backed by better financial instruments with lower cost than others, and not on the other side to support the transition and not only focusing on specific projects, because we think that the energy transition is a revolution, and you can name a revolution project by project. You have to have supporting the path of the transition. Because nothing was present in the market at the time we invented the sustainable linked bonds. That is exactly as this characteristic. And we tried to have a discount on our normal bond issuance, and we got it. We got it because we offer the market companies, sustainable companies looking forward with a more profitable share on one side and less risk. And we sold it. Now, and after these, three main important things happened. One, the ECMA standardized the instrument. The second, now the instrument is becoming mainstream, because today we have 50 billion euros of issuance already done. And the third is that now is becoming so mainstream, also in the fact that it's supporting the transition, and also the central bank, European Central Bank, now is starting buying this instrument. This is the final package of this new instrument, and we think that will help this path, because sustainable finance has to provide solutions, because all the companies at different stage with different target may offer and may be backed in their path to reach the sustainable targets that we all have as inhabitants of this world.
Thank you, Alberto, for sharing your journey in sustainable finance. That's amazing. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to move on to the second topic, the future. So the transition path to net zero will be different depending on the industry, region, the nature of the business, and the time scale. So I'd like to ask each of our speakers their views on how companies can accelerate this transition and how they think sustainable finance will play a role. So again, let me first ask Fiona. So Fiona, many investors still focus on short-term gains rather than having a strategic dialogue with corporation to understand the long-term transition. So how will you encourage more investors to responsible investments? We know for sure that will help the company to speed up their transition. And also, as I mentioned, the transition path will vary depending on the sector, the various factors. So how will the PRI principles evolve to address these differences in transition?
Yeah, okay, so I do think that this is happening. I mean, I'm not saying that all investors are actually engaging with companies about their long-term plans, but I certainly think that a lot of PRI signatories do. And really, since our founding, the external environment around us has continued to evolve significantly. So we've seen the adoption of the Paris Agreement, and we've seen the Sustainable Development Goals adopted, as well as really, evolution in terminology, in investors' expectations and practices. So investors are thinking, not just about the returns for their beneficiaries, that's obviously their job, but they're also thinking about the world into which their beneficiaries live and want to retire. And we're really building the work to help them do that. And so while we've really come this far in integrating ESG factors into investment practices, much of the focus of our work going forward is on building the responsible investment practices for the future. So to support meeting the SDGs, investors really need to understand how they can increase the positive outcomes of their portfolio and decrease the negative outcomes arising from, their actions and their investments. So increasingly, we're seeing investors really recognising feedback loops between the real economy and financial markets, where the outcomes they shape directly impact the risks and the opportunities they face. And by really considering those real-world outcomes alongside risk and return, investors play a really important role in addressing issues that seriously threaten the long-term performance of economies, of their portfolios, of companies making up that portfolio, and of course, as I said, the world into which their beneficiaries live. So really to help our signatories better understand how to shape these outcomes, earlier this year, we launched a 3-year strategy that's under the theme of building a bridge between financial risks, opportunities, and real-world outcomes. And in this strategy, we're really looking to help those signatories seeking to understand what good practice looks like, how to integrate and measure outcomes, while remaining, of course, firmly grounded in their fiduciary duty and the broader role they have in society. I think a really great example, if I can have one, of investors shaping real-world outcomes and really moving the dial in sustainable finance is the UN-convened NETZERO Asset Owner Alliance, which is a leadership program that was put together by the PRI and UNEPFI, whose members have committed to aligning their portfolios with net zero by 2050. And they've also had to have short-term targets. The first is 2025. And, this group has got so far just over 40 of the largest pension funds and insurance companies in the world. And they really recognise that they're not only vulnerable to the systemic disruptions that climate change will unleash on ecosystems and societies and economies, but also that they've got a role to play in catalysing decarbonisation of the economy and investing in climate resilience. And of course, given the scale and the challenges that we face, investors can't do this alone. So they need to be working with the companies that are in their portfolios about their plans and their objectives and how they're transitioning their companies. So the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance also recognises that it's not just working with business, it's also working with governments. We need governments to set strong roadmaps about the actions that they're going to take so that investment can flow and that business brings about change. And increasingly, that dialogue between business and investors is ramping up.
Excellent. Thank you, Fiona. So let me now turn to SUGA of MUFG and ask a little bit about the situation in Japan. So SUGA, many Japanese companies are trying to come up with a transition plan, especially after the government announced the 2050 net zero target. So how do you think Japanese financial institutions can support this transition? And do you see any challenges, and how will MUFG address them?
Well, first of all, I agree that transition paths to net zero will vary. And indeed, demographics, economic maturity, industrial structure, natural resource reserves, current energy mix, and the geographical requirement for renewable energy. These are all different everywhere. So I would say each local, regional, and national transition is going to be unique. Japan, for instance, as I mentioned, has distinct issues with the nuclear power, expanding renewables, and sharing electricity overseas. The situation is quite similar throughout Asia, where demand for electricity continues to increase. Therefore, simply resolving to pursue green may not be enough for successful decarbonization. Well, it is essential for government, industry, and the financial sector to work together in a mutual trust with a real understanding of what makes each region unique, including its industrial profile and its time horizons. So, as a responsible financial institution, MUFG emphasizes engagement with the stakeholders in order to support smooth decarbonization. In line with this concept, our designated team for customer coverage and providing solutions is already in dialogue with industry groups and government agencies, as well as engagement with 60 of our top priority corporate clients. We all want a transition that respects each client's circumstance, and MUFG knows we bear a huge responsibility in this regard. We also have to be mindful of greenwashing and take measures that consider global standards as well as the perspective of stakeholders, including those of environmental NGOs. As a start, each nation needs to develop a transparent, predictable, and a credible plan that reflects its own institution, own situation. On the other hand, financial institutions need to develop disciplined dialogue with the clients by assessing whether the client's approach is truly consistent with the Paris Agreement. In light of a proper assessment of the transition efforts, the Japanese government has taken a step toward this, with guidelines clarifying the concept of transition finance related to climate change based on international principles of the International Capital Market Association. According to the guidelines, financial institutions in Japan should not only focus on the individual projects that need funding, but also comprehensively consider the transition strategy of the borrower, including its credibility and transparency to implement its proposed green strategy. Such transition strategy needs to be based on the scientific evidence, which can refer to sectoral roadmap currently being developed by the Japanese government that should also be consistent with the Paris Agreement. I hope such roadmaps will reflect Japan's uniqueness and at the same time be well received by various global stakeholders.
Thank you, Sugu. That's great. So let me now ask Ricardo about the situation in Brazil. So I believe Brazil will still need to rely on natural resources such as oil and iron mining as the country continues to grow, right? So, but I also understand that Brazil is making progress in renewable energy. So my question is, how do you strike a balance between the environment and economic growth? And in light of that, what do you see the best transition pathway for Brazil, and how will you support the overall transition for the country?
Tamal, thanks for the question. The financial sector plays an important role in the allocation of resources in the economy, as banks plays a leading role in the growth process of the productive sector and direct the necessary capital for business development. By considering ESG aspects in the business strategy, the sector can bring new financial instruments to the market, such as equity for new technologies, emissions trading platforms, and green loans, taking advantage of the new value-sharing opportunities. We want to help our clients in this transition to a low-carbon economy by offering sustainable products and services and spreading good ESG practice throughout the value chain. Some of the main initiatives are: we launched an exclusive credit line for individual customers to finance up to 100% of the value of solar systems that reached a balance of 6 billion reais in renewable energy financing. We want to reach a balance of 15 billion reais by 2025. We also made a new consortium group, green groups, for the acquisition of goods aimed at the efficient use of natural resources and low carbon emissions. 10,000 consortium quotas were sold, totaling more than 700 million reais in sales volume. It's also a part of our corporate objective to gradually reduce the exposure of the credit portfolio to high and medium impact sectors, while recognizing the challenge and needs to each one of them. Banco do Brasil has sustainability guidelines for credit for 10 sectors of the economy with the higher possible environmental impact, such as agribusiness, civil construction, and electricity, among others. The guidelines set conditions and address strategic issues such as the biodiversity and climate change. For controversial and emissions-intensive sectors, such as oil and mining, Banco do Brasil finances projects that follow the best sustainable practices and in line with international agreements and that aim to preserve the environment. We require proof of environmental regularity from clients throughout the term of the deal, and all transactions have contractual clauses with the prerogative of suspending the transfer of funds or early maturity of the contract in event of a non-compliance with social environment requirements. In relation to agribusiness, we require extensive documentation to ensure social environment regularity of financed projects and mitigate illegal deforestation. In the case of operations in the Amazon biome, we are even more restrictive. Banco do Brasil is aware of the relevance and urgency of the issue of climate change and the importance of engaging governments, the private sector, and society in efforts to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. And that's why we are committed to helping our clients in the transition to a greener portfolio and with the leading role that Brazil can assume in this issue. Yet, from our own operation perspective, we have established a commitment to reduce direct emissions of greenhouse gases by 30% by 2030 and to reach 90% of our energy matrix generated from sustainable sources. We have already 2 solar plants in operation, and we will have 4 more plants starting to generate energy in 2021. What we cannot reduce, we will compensate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your explanation, Ricardo. That's really insightful. So lastly, Alberto, for Enel, I understand you will further increase your sustainable finance to 70% of your total funding portfolio by 2030. This reflects your funding strategy being aligned with your ESG perspectives as part of your corporate strategy. So what expectations do you have for financial institutions and investors?
Well, so we work under a framework that we call the sustainability as value. That means that sustainable choices will have to create value for the company that is choosing this business concept, and for all the stakeholders that are involved in the action of the company. We work in the energy sector, and we know that the most we are discussing about is related with the problem of how we produce and use energy. So we defined our new business model around the concept that, one, we have to decarbonize all the production. Second, we have to upgrade and digitize all the infrastructure used for the electricity. And third, that every one of us will have to use only electrical power for final uses. This is our perspective and our business model. And you understand that when it comes to show to investors the value for us, for Enel, to stay in such a business, I think is easy to understand. because so every one of us talk about the net zero target, but I think we don't know how many electrical power will have to be used in a world at net zero. There is so incredible increase versus what we have today, and those are the markets in which we act, that some markets are so incredible big and huge in the future that we will not have any demand problem in the foreseeable future, and also we will not have any competitive problem, because the more we will be in this sector, the best will be for the world. So this is an easy concept to say the value creation. On the other side, we have a problem, or say an important things to do to show how the value will be spread throughout all the stakeholders. And I think every one of you know that making all our consumption of energy consumption by electricity in the future will bring a saving that is in the range of 30–40% of the spending that we are doing today for the same use of energy using different funds. So this is something that is a value, like the value of the GDP increase on the other side, like the value to have no pollution, like the value of the health value, of all the values that we will bring in this transition. This has to be evident for everyone, and evident means that it has to be measurable, and you have to have good stories around it. And the good stories is the company may create big values, and consumers will make big savings, and the economy will work. So this is the way in which we think every one of us will have to conceive in this concept. And that's why we said the first thing we have to do is to show the world that we can create value, because we think that is the first, say, there are not guys that are choosing sustainability because it's green. They are choosing sustainability because they are choosing the way to create more value. Our company doubled, tripled the value. This is for me a good sign to say to everyone making these choices is creating value for all. So I think this has to be an economical and financial concept that will have to be more understood in the future, because this will trigger and gather other behaviors. And so creating the SDG 17 on cooperation to push forward so the transition and to go in the new world.
Thank you, Alberto. Well, thank you, everyone. It's just been so insightful. But maybe to conclude the session, I would like to ask each of you, maybe 2 minutes each, if you have any further thoughts that you'd like to share, such as your vision as a leader, or more generally, any message you'd like to share with the audience today. So maybe I go with Fiona again. Fiona first.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I agree with much of what's been said. Look, I think from the investment community, we need to see them step up and do more. So investors, in their role at the top of the investment chain, really, they have leverage. They have leverage with companies as the major shareholders, and they need to be using it. And they need to be doing their part to make sure that we do have this transition to, carbon neutral, and as well as protecting value, as Alberto was just talking about, along the way. So this needs to be a partnership with business and with government. And I think if we think about climate change, if I could use just a very quick example, we can see that investors are demanding more from companies, and they're trying to make sure that their voices are heard. And if we look at the 2021 annual proxy season, it was really unprecedented, with record number of climate and environmental related shareholder proposals. We're part of Climate Action 100+. It's the biggest ever investor to corporate engagement, 570 investors, 54 trillion in assets under management, and 3 clear asks that we want to make sure that boards have a strong governance framework and they're thinking about climate change and they've got oversight of it. We want them to reduce emissions, set their net zero target and tell us the pathway, and then report to us in line with the TCFD. And if we just look at the shareholder proposals I was talking about, frustration from investors because some companies are just not making that transition. So we saw a dramatic shake-up at Exxon, where a majority of shareholders voted to replace members of the board. We've seen at Shell that a Dutch court has ordered them to reduce emissions by 2030 and cut CO2 emissions by 45% after engagement with investors, but also some NGOs who brought an action. And then meanwhile at Chevron at their annual general meeting, we've seen investors also voting for reduced emissions. So really, in short, investors are stepping up, and I think and they want to work with corporations who are bringing about change, and where they won't, investors will take further action and vote with their feet.
Thank you, Fiona. So maybe next to Ricardo.
Thanks. Over the last few decades, social environmental subjects have gained ground among the main concerns of global leaders. This uneasy is growing among a new generation of business leaders who are truly aware of these issues. They know that if they do not act, they will not only be putting their profits at risk, but the future of their companies. They know they need to take a stand on this theme, and they are trying to find the best ways to do that. And the reason is because behavioral changes are becoming increasingly visible. Young people are very attentive to the social and environmental aspects of what they buy, and also consider this criteria when choosing the companies they work for and which they will interact. Society has been pressing the governments to adopt stricter regulatory standards. Investors are increasingly demanding about the performance and the disclosure of ESG information. We understand that a culture of sustainability is essential for companies to be able to identify and manage the current and future risks and opportunities and generate value for their stakeholders. Being clear about the challenges that are presented to us and the position we occupy is decisive for us to achieve more positive results and commit to this new global development agenda. Here at Banco do Brasil, we have a purpose, which is to take care of what's valuable to people. Despite all the progress already made, we are aware of the challenges that ESG issues represent, and that therefore we are attentive to the paths that Banco do Brasil needs to take to foster an increasingly sustainable economy. Finally, the message I would like to leave to leaders is to consider ESG issues in the decision-making process. We certainly need to generate value to our shareholders, but we need to go further. It's necessary to generate value for all our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. So maybe to SUGA, please.
Thank you. As Tamao referred in her first question, MUFG is the first Japanese bank to declare carbon neutrality and take part in the United Nations-led NETZERO Banking Alliance. We know the importance of promoting this aspiration on an ongoing basis and will expedite concrete measures to formulate the 2030 target by the end of next year to fulfill our commitment. Our efforts will be focused not just on Japan, but globally. To hand over a sustainable planet to future generations, the time for action is now or never. It is essential for each party to fulfill its own role. Industries have started to undergo structural changes, and the governments and the central banks are creating frameworks to support climate change activities in the private sector. Climate change, in fact, will be discussed this year at the G20, G7, and the COP26 platform for global coordination. These are all good developments, but we also look forward to seeing a globally harmonized framework developed for the most fundamental disclosure standards. So let me close with this. You may have noticed that MUFG has recently stated our corporate purpose as being committed to empowering a brighter future. This applies to decarbonization as well, and we pledge support for world movement toward carbon neutrality by applying solutions we have in our strengths. We want to work with each of you and look forward to creating a sustainable world together as a team. Thank you.
Thank you, Suga, for your strong and powerful message. That's great. So lastly, to Alberto, any message for the audience, please?
Well, I think that sustainable business models and energy transition will redesign the world we are accustomed to completely from the roots. I think that so also the concept of the capitalism that we have had until now would be completely changed after the next in the next 10, 15 years. I think we have the honor to be in positions in which we can drive one of the most important step ahead of humanity. And so I think so it's very relevant that the cooperation among us and that the governments and the politics will understood that this is something that is not only a slogan, that now is becoming actions, that no one will have to be left behind, because no one has to have fear to enter to such a revolution, because we know that for the world that will come these are the right things to do. Multinational companies have a big role in this. And under the institution, the Global Compact, the PRI, so I'm a proud co-chair of the CFO task force under the UN Global Compact, and we are working on the financial will that will support this transition. So all these institutions will have to work together. So sometimes I feel that some of us think they have the right solution instead of another one. I think that make all the things together, not saying that I have the final solution, but try to bring all together in this new field is very relevant. I'm proud, and I just think that the European Commission is doing the right thing now in keeping the track and to say, so now we want to have very, very tough target. Now they will, a big discussion will arise around this point, but it's not only to reach a sustainable world, there's also to reach a new technology, the technology and also new leadership in technology that will support the new world and the new way in which we will stay in the world, we will produce another. And finally, I think that also capitalism will have to be changed a little bit. It's not a shareholders capitalism, that we are entering in a stakeholder capitalism. And it's not only a little change in the world, it's a big, big change in the concept in which we do things. So these are my final message to the audience.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alberto. Unfortunately, I think it's getting close to the end, but we heard so many insightful comments from all of you today, but clearly engagement with all the stakeholders is key. And I think, Alberto, you mentioned about stakeholder capitalism, which is always a consistently important theme nowadays. So yeah, I think, let me summarize quickly, but I think hearing from all of you, it is just clear that sustainable finance will play an even more critical role in the transition to net zero. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's session. There was a lot of valuable insights. And let me thank all of you, to the speakers, for participating and sharing your precious insights and experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have a panel discussion based on the theme of Transition in Emerging Countries. We would like to introduce to you our panelists for this session. Mr. Tengku Muhammad Taufik, President and Group Chief Executive Officer of Petroleum Nasional Berhad Petronas. Mr. Zhou Liang, Chairman of the Board, Juhua Group Corporation. Mr. Sumant Sinha, Founder, Chairman, and Managing Director of Renew Power Private Limited. And Mr. Satoshi Akita, Founder and CEO of Washa. The panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Kazushige Nobutani, President, Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO. We would like to pass it over to you, Mr. Nobutani.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to panel discussion number 3 at NETZERO Leaders Summit. In this panel, we discuss transition of emerging economies. We have distinguished panelists from Malaysia, India, China, and Japan. My name is Kazushige Nobutani, the President of JETRO, or Japan External Trade Organization. I am given a privilege to moderate today's panel. Let us get into the discussion. Today, we focus on 2 issues. The first one is efforts and challenges, and the second one is opportunities and cooperation. Today's panelists face different realities, such as economic situation, social structure, geography, availability of energy sources, etc. And they drive energy transition to carbon neutrality in realistic and individual manner. There's no single silver bullet. Here comes the first question. Please tell us your efforts and challenges against backdrop of your company and your country. I'd like to give 3 minutes for each. Please start with brief self-introduction and make your comments. The first panelist is Mr. Tengku Muhammad Taufik from Petronas, Malaysia. Petronas is one of the largest national oil companies in the world. Mr. Tengku Taufik will explain how he leads energy transition of his company and his country. So, Mr. Taufik, please.
Thank you, Nobutani-san. To the esteemed members of this panel, to the people watching, my name is Taufik. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here, to be a guest of this function. And I think this is a very important topic that we need to tackle together. Let's face the realities that we contend with. The Asia-Pacific region still will continue, despite the current hiccups that we face because of the pandemic, to be a center of energy demand growth well into the next 3 or 4 decades. And this growth is driven by increased urbanization, industrialization, and increasing economic affluence of its citizens. We will have a greater middle class. And with this kind of challenge, the region must ensure that energy supply is affordable, it is secure, and it is sustainable. Now, if we think about the numbers that Asia contends with, we still have the challenge of hundreds of millions of people, 200 by last count, who still cannot get regular access to electricity, and over 1 billion who will need to still tackle the needs for things as basic as cooking fuel. With the pandemic hitting us, there has been a point in time that we deal with this as an industry-wide and a national imperative across many borders. We are faced with the challenge of providing the people of Asia Pacific as a pathway to more secure and sustainable energy. So insofar as Petronas' role as a national oil company, we must focus on being able to produce affordable and reliable energy solutions that has positive social impact and is also sustainable when it comes to the perspective of the government, the environment rather. And in doing so, we have always held up as a hallmark our reliability as a provider of energy solutions. We are an established player within the LNG market, and we've got a proven track record of delivering over 11,000 cargoes safely. And we need to work towards decarbonizing our entire product portfolio very, very quickly, while leveraging on our geographic proximity to many of the core markets in this energy demand center. As we go down the path of dealing with energy transition, we will also be tackling the need to diversify our products and offerings to the market while decarbonizing and making ourselves cleaner and more sustainable. This means moving into adjacencies, working in business spaces such as LNG bunkering, entering and working with governments that are addressing energy mix shifts through solutions like virtual pipeline systems, and even providing for extra solutions to unlock stranded gas, such as floating solutions that we have. We are working with many partners to pursue a lower carbon footprint. And to this end, I conclude by saying we have committed to a net zero carbon emissions by 2050 to focus and demonstrate our commitment to becoming a more sustainable player. Thank you, Nobutani-san.
Well, thank you, Mr. Taufik. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Zhou Liang, Chairman of Juha Group Co. Limited from China. Yeah.
I am the chairman of the board of Juha Group Corporation. Juha Group is a chemical conglomerate, and we are developing fluorine chemical, electronic chemical, and green materials. Energy transition. In energy transition, we have two challenges. First, we have to develop. At the same time, we are facing the challenge of emission peak. In many companies of developed countries, they have already developed, followed by emission peak. However, Juha is having a biggest challenge, which is how to achieve development under the limited energy conditions. Second is the power supply structure transformation. How to transform from thermal power generation structure to low carbon power source. It is an unavoidable proposition. And so we deal with the challenges of carbon peak out and carbon neutrality in the following aspects. First, we are optimizing the energy structure and promoting diversified energy allocation. We are looking at the source of electricity. The low productivity project with high emission is now being restricted strictly, and we are also allocating resources to green industry. And we are promoting solar photovoltaic power generation projects and actively applying green power and renewable energy to generate electricity. We are also accelerating construction of natural gas power generation projects. Secondly, we are conserving energy and reducing emissions to improve energy efficiency. Including APC, we are constructing digital plants. And we are optimizing the production process to reduce material and energy consumption. Furthermore, we are building the circular economy industry chain and strengthening the recovery and utilization of byproducts and waste, and improving the utilization level of heat waste. We are also creating sophisticated equipment to raise the energy efficiency of mechanical and electrical equipment. That is all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zhou. China is the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, but on the other hand, they have very strong industry on renewable energy, electric vehicle, batteries, and chemical industry such as Juha. We learn a lot. Thank you very much. Next one is Mr. Sinha from India. Please talk about your business to lead energy transition in India?
Yes, thank you so much, Nobutani-san. It's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking to all of you and my fellow colleagues on the panel as well. Renew Power is a relatively younger company. We have been in operation for the last 10 years, and we are a company that purely targets setting up, owning, and operating wind farms and solar farms. And we have been doing that, as I said, for the last 10 years. We now have close to 10,000 megawatts of commissioned wind and solar capacity, or in the process of getting commissioned. And at this point, we now generate almost 1% of India's total electricity production and help mitigate almost 0.5% of India's total carbon emissions. So we've now become a good-sized company, and we're helping have an impact on India's energy transition and as well as the climate change issues. We have a fully integrated model where we set up everything ourselves, and we also do the asset management ourselves. And so that is a capability that we've created over the years. And if you look at India's energy transition right now, India is really going from an area of dependence on coal-based power, which accounted for almost 65% of India's total power generation, to now a situation where over the next 10 years, renewable energy will account for at least 35% of total power generation. And so this will require us to add very, very significant new capacities of renewable energy. And the government's target is to increase the existing installed capacity of renewable energy of 90,000 megawatts by 5 times over the next 10 years. And so the intention is to get to 450 gigawatts of installed wind and solar capacity in the next 10 years. So there is a very significant plan that the government has laid out. And then, of course, we have new emerging areas like clean hydrogen also coming up, which will allow us to not just produce clean energy for the electricity sector, but also for other areas of energy consumption, such as mobility and so on. So I think those are areas in which there is going to be a fairly broad basing of clean energy into other areas beyond just the electricity consumption area. So India is well advanced on this path. The government of India is a very big supporter of this whole program. And we have given very significant commitments at the Paris Climate Accords and subsequently on the targets for clean energy and the transition towards cleaner fuels. And we are well on our way to achieving those targets. And there are companies, of course, like us who are working as hard as we can, raising capital, executing projects, as well as there are many other companies who are also doing that. And therefore, this is a very active sector in India right now. And the tariffs have become very competitive. And now clean energy affords us the cheapest form of new electricity. And that hopefully then will become affordable and accessible to everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sinha. We can learn how active private sector in India is leading energy transition. Thank you. So next one is Mr. Akita from Russia. Mr. Akita is one of the most famous entrepreneurs in Japan. He works on electrification in Africa. So please tell us your story.
Thank you, Nobutani-san. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me introduce challenge first. Currently, there are 770 million people who do not have access to electricity in the world. Then 75% of those people are in sub-Saharan Africa. There are two major challenges. The first is distance. In sub-Saharan Africa, people are scattered over a large area of land. So the typical electrification approach, such as building power plants and extending power line, is too costly to cover the entire region. The second is the low income of the customers. Solar panels are widely available for off-grid areas, but many people living in rural areas cannot afford them due to their low income. So under these circumstances, we are offering an innovative service that allows low-income customers to rent rechargeable LED lanterns, which is charged by solar panel, that meet their minimum needs of lighting and mobile phone charging for one day when they have small amount of money. This is made possible by a network of local retailers and a unique billing system using mobile money. In rural areas, retail shop owners operate the rental service and charging as agents on our behalf. The retailers network is developed by local washer members using our own selection methods, and the number of stores has reached 5,000 in Tanzania and Uganda in East Africa at the moment. Our billing system is designed for prepaid to avoid money collection risk and allowing customers to use our service with very small amounts of money. So we are currently operating in 2 countries and plan to expand our service to other countries. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Akita. A very brief and persuasive explanation. Well, we have covered South Asia, China, India, and Africa within half hour, thanks to digital technology. We learned many things, but maybe energy access is still important in Asia and Africa. Also, technology is important to achieve ambitious goal, like Mr. Akita said. And the intermittency and renewable energy is another important aspect. In short, people are fighting in a different situation, in different manner. So there seems to be a room for international cooperation. So let us move on to the second issue, opportunities and cooperations. Challenges sometimes means opportunities. Challenging opportunity is good timing to make new friends. I would like to panelists to explain how you take advantages of opportunities and what is your expectation for international cooperation, especially with Japan. So let us go on the same order. I would like to give 3 minutes for each. So first, Mr. Taufik, please.
Nobutani-san, thank you for that. You couldn't have said it better. There are many interest groups and many challenges across many countries, and many regions face very diverse and different challenges, as outlined by Mr. Sinha and Mr. Akita earlier, as well as Mr. Zhou. There is no one single pathway to achieving an entirely sustainable solution and carbon neutrality. There are 3 elements to Petronas' mind that we need to address. Number 1 is the access to the right technologies, is very amply demonstrated by Mr. Akita's story earlier. The second, the willingness to transition to have the skill sets and capabilities to deal with a new energy landscape. And the third, perhaps the most important, if not the most difficult to secure, is a clear and coherent investment framework for energy transition. And I believe that the governments that we work for and work with have an influence over how energy investments can flow and collaborate and address the energy needs. Every country is unique in its search for access to reliable and secure energy. And therefore, dealing with issues such as intermittency, Petronas has always embarked upon the belief that energy transition can be planned. There is something naturally suited to help energy transition as a fuel, which is in our view, natural gas. And we are always in awe and admire countries such as Japan, which have already strongly committed to sustainable energy practices. In fact, we have taken a leaf and taken the example of the net zero aspiration as announced by Prime Minister SUGA. And in that context, collaboration is necessary to address those 3 key elements. In us doing so, we are working not only within the country with state energies that pursue electrification solutions as well as hydrogen, but we've also worked with the Middle East entities such as ADNOC and Masdar to explore new solutions within the space of R&D for hydrocarbon recovery, carbon capture, and hydrogen, both from blue and green sphere. But with specific regards to Japan, we are proud to announce that we have had a number of MOUs and collaborations for feasibility studies, in particular for the hydrogen chain and how to deliver it and solve the logistics issues with people like ENEOS. We've talked also with JERA in the same front. Similar with Itochu and Mitsubishi Corp, we have also explored how the supply chain for hydrogen can be resolved. With CCUS, we've always aspired to work with someone like JOGMEC, and we believe that this will be part of the holistic solution in coming to a more carbon neutral future. Back to you, Nobutani-san.
Thank you, Mr. Tung Taufik. The next one, I'd like to invite Mr. Zhou from China.
Thank you very much. In my view, the process of carbon neutral will lead to green technology innovations in power transportation, industry, new materials, construction, agriculture, carbon negative technologies, and information as well as digital technologies, which are likely to become important investment opportunities in the future. From the perspective of the future, JUHUA is vigorously developing related materials for photovoltaic, energy storage, integrated circuits, and other fields. Examples would be lithium battery, new diaphragm materials, fuel cell membrane materials, photovoltaic backboard materials, power battery packaging materials, energy storage battery electrolyte, and big data center thermal management materials. Acceleration of the development of new energy equipment, such as light photovoltaic modules, new energy compressors, high-pressure hydrogen storage tanks, liquid hydrogen storage tanks, efficient liquid flow batteries. These will be the new growth opportunities of JUHUA's future green development. At the same time, JUHUA is also actively exploring the cultivation of hydrogen energy industry, deeply integrating information technology, digital intelligence, and chemical production to build a future factory. JUHUA has always attached great importance to international cooperation. Examples would be Marubeni, JGC, Central Glass, Asahi Kasei, Showa Denko, Yokogawa Electrics. We have been able to establish very deep cooperation with such Japanese enterprises. We cover fluorine chemical industry, electronic chemical materials, hydrogen energy industry, intelligent manufacturing, and have achieved remarkable results. As our next steps, JUHUA hopes to carry out more and closer cooperation with Japanese enterprises in commodity trade, development of high-end new materials technology, development of high-end equipment technology in the field of hydrogen energy, development of low-carbon technology, and zero-carbon technology. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zhou. Next one is Mr. Sinha from India, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Nobutani-san. Look, you're absolutely right. The task in front of us in terms of this energy transition across the world, not just in India, not just in Asia, but all over the world, is something that is really, really a big challenge. And we don't have time because we have, the longer we carry on burning fossil fuels, the worse the problem gets and the sooner it becomes worse. So we have to get to a solution as quickly as possible. And for that, we really need everybody pulling in the same direction. We need, 2-3 different areas that have to come together. The first, of course, is technology. If we don't have technology developments, we will not be able to find the right solutions. And the good news is that over the last 10 years, we have been able to demonstrate that we can find solutions in the reduction of the renewable energy tariffs that have happened through technology evolution. We are now seeing the improvements in battery technology that will allow us to continue to have more and more storage to manage the intermittency of grids. We're also now beginning to see solutions emerging around hydrogen. And those are things which I think are very, very critical to allow us to make this energy transition. And therefore, technology needs to be democratized. It cannot be sitting in any one country. It has to move as quickly as possible across borders. And all of this requires international cooperation. The second area is financing. I think we need institutional investors from all over the world investing wherever we can have reduction in carbon emissions, whether it's in emerging market countries, Asia or the US or Europe, does not matter. So we need a lot more flow of capital. And the third thing is we need more and more companies that get involved in this space, because we need more people executing projects at the same time. You cannot, this job is so large that it cannot be done by 3 or 4 or 5 companies. It has to be done by a number of companies, oil and gas companies, utilities, IPPs like us, new age companies. Everybody has to try and come together. So I think these are the 3 or 4 different areas in which we require really good borderless international cooperation almost to solve the problem. How can Japanese companies get involved? We are fortunate that we already have a Japanese partner. JERA was an investor who came into our company almost 3.5 years ago. They've been very good partners for us. They've given us capital and they've given us some people, and they also give us expertise and cooperation. And so our partnership with JERA has been very positive for us. They own about 10% of our equity. And like that, we're talking to a number of other Japanese companies as well for investments into projects in India, because as you know, this area requires a lot of capital. So I think that's another area in which we're looking at. The third area I think we can look at is partnership with entities like JEBIC to again provide debt financing as well. So I think those are the areas in which we can partner with Japanese companies to really go further in the space. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sinha. The final one, Mr. Akita, please.
Thank you, Tani-san. In my opinion, electrification scenario in sub-Saharan Africa is different in urban and rural areas. As for urban area, there are huge business opportunities in the context of carbon neutrality. In fact, Marubeni Corporation, which is an investor of Russia, is focusing on such projects, such as mega solar power plant. In addition, there are opportunities not only in the energy industry, but also in the consumer business. For instance, Baridi Baridi, a joint venture between Daikin Industry and Russia, is expanding its subscription service for energy-saving air conditioners in urban areas of Tanzania and increasing the number of customers right now. However, I suppose carbon neutrality itself is not a business opportunity for business in rural areas in Africa. This is because environmental friendliness is not recognized as an additional added value. For them, affordability is the most important factor. As a company, environmental consideration must be taken into account as a cost. And the key to success is how we can minimize total cost in R&D, business model design, and operation design. Also, if you do business in rural part of Africa, the most important thing is to improve their income and increase their options. For a long-term perspective, not limited to environmental issue, the challenge is how much we can develop local businesses that will generate higher income for local customers, such as farmers, fishermen, and retail store owners. So we are now preparing new businesses in such areas. So if there are companies that are interested in collaborating with us in those fields, I would like to talk. Thank you. That's all.
Well, Mr. Actor, thank you. We have touched upon many important points. As Mr. Actor said, affordability of energy is one of the most important issues, not only in Africa, but also in Asia. Also in Europe, they always mention the problem of energy poverty. Affordability or energy poverty versus environmental integrity is our most difficult part for us. Everyone pointed out the importance of technology. Technology can be a key to solve this question. Mr. Taufik, he pointed out importance of policy framework that can be accelerate flow of capital and availability of technology, as Mr. Sinha pointed out. So we can ask our government to work harder to focus on technology development, which can be useful for energy poverty and affordability of energy and development of Asia and Africa. This might be the important point of our discussion this time. So, thank you very much for the comment on 2 questions. We learn we are facing on different issues in different regions, different topics in different economic situations. We are doing our own effort to tackle the challenges. China, India, Asia, Africa, they are all developing economies. We are in the middle of a developing process. And it is important for all of us to find practical solution how to deal with the carbon neutrality. Also, I found there are lots of international cooperation among us. I'm very happy to hear many of you already have a cooperation with Japanese companies, which is good for us too. It is a good opportunity for Japanese companies to invest as well. We would like to encourage these kind of cooperation among us. Business players in Japan are ready to work with you, and Japanese mega banks have been famous as top supporter of renewable energy around the globe. And my organization, JETRO, is always happy to connect all of you. Finally, I would like to conclude this panel by asking final comment to you. So please tell us your leadership toward carbon neutrality. Mr. Tung Taufik, please.
Thank you, Nobutani-san. We will definitely take up your offer to hear from JETRO and how much we can collaborate more with Japanese entities. In Petronas, we are driven by our purpose to become a progressive energy and solutions partner to enrich lives for a sustainable future. When we make that statement, it is very curious for many people to hear oil and gas is not in the statement. We want to make sure that energy is delivered to every one of our customers in a way that is affordable, that it is secure, and it is sustainable. The classic energy trilemma, which is not very easy to achieve. And we do believe, and I emphasize again, as you said earlier, that not only the technologies and the skills need to be developed, but also that all important capital flows where sustainability issues are dealt with at different speeds must flow to the right place at the right time. And in doing so, the only way to really achieve this is collaboration, not only from within the energy fraternity, but also across many industries. As you have heard, technology does not only affect any one emitter of carbon, it has also to deal with the emissions across many, many sectors and many, many geographies. So we hope that in driving the policy back home in Malaysia, as providing the input for our own national energy policy, in advocating the use of natural gas as a transition fuel, and working with many, many customers in addressing their policy shifts, we will help progress the necessary solutions towards achieving the reduction of carbon from our energy systems over time in a deliberate and strategic manner for the benefit of all. Thank you, Nobutani-san.
Thank you, Mr. Teng Taufik. Next one is Mr. Zhou, please.
Dealing with climate change is a common cause of all mankind. As the largest developing country, China has made a solemn commitment to reduce emissions. It will achieve the highest reduction in carbon intensity in the world, from carbon peak to carbon neutrality, in the shortest time in the world's history. As a Chinese company, Zhihua will adhere to the innovation, harmony, green, openness, and shareness, a new development concept, and uphold the open and inclusive, learn from others, fusion refinement, self-contained business philosophy. And we will focus on carbon peak and carbon neutrality issues in key areas and strengthen our innovation. And will strengthen international economic and technological cooperation between enterprises and accelerate the adjustment of energy structure, industrial structure optimization, green and low carbon development through green development, digital reform, to build a respected enterprise. Zhihua is willing to work with all of you to make unremitting efforts to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality and contribute to strengthen and use our strength to building a common beautiful home. I hope you will come to Zhihua. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zhou. Next is Mr. Sinha from Renew, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Our company's purpose is to create a carbon-free world by accelerating the transition towards clean energy. And that is something that we have been working on diligently. And the good news, as I said earlier, is that the evolution of technology has happened so fast that solutions are now emerging that were not earlier possible. And I'm very confident that as we go forward, those kinds of solutions will continue to emerge as new technology research delivers us new solutions that we cannot at this point envisage. And our job as a company is to take those developed technologies and to apply it as quickly as possible into the large market of India. India is a country where the power demand will grow at about 5 to 6% every year for the next many decades, because India's per capita power consumption is so low. And so the choices that a country like India makes will be very fundamental to the world's battle against climate change. And our job as a company is to make sure that we play a pivotal role and a central role in making sure that that energy transition happens in the most effective manner possible without imposing any burdens on the economy and on the common man. And that's the purpose with which we as a company are going forward. This will not happen by itself because there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And in that respect, our job is not just to operate as a company by ourselves, but also to create a whole series of partnerships and joint ventures, which can allow us to, as I said earlier, raise more capital, get new technologies to come in, and increase our capability to execute projects on the ground. Because when you look at the physical challenge of creating the hundreds of thousands of megawatts of clean energy that we require to find the right solutions, it's an enormous challenge. And so therefore, there is going to be a lot of work for all of us to be done to move towards the whole area of carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. So next one is Mr. Akita, please.
So our vision is to unlock humankind's limitation. Through business, we would like to support the low-income people in developing countries to remove their constraints, such as lack of access to electricity, lack of access to job opportunity, lack of access to technology, such the lack of access, and also lack of capability. I believe that the key to this is to make something people want and affordable. So we will continue to go into the local communities and develop our business so that we can provide appropriate services, not only rent-and rental service, but also other services that meet their needs at a price they can afford. In this process, we will also consider carbon neutrality as an aspect. That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Akita. Well, today we discussed many things, but I would like to conclude as follows. First of all, everyone have agreed the purpose of carbon neutrality. Everyone is moving forward in this way. The second one is that everyone faces different situations and everyone needs different solutions. For example, natural gas is needed for energy transition. Energy access is important in some area. The affordability of technology is important. So we need different solutions for different countries. There is no silver bullet for this matter. And policy framework is important to coordinate our effort. Finally, everyone loves cooperation rather than blaming game. We want to work together with big smiles rather than blaming each other. That is our discussion. International cooperation can be a kind of hot spice to accelerate our effort for a better future. Thank you very much for joining us today, and goodbye.
To conclude this event, Mr. Hiroshi Kajiyama, Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, will deliver a video message.
皆さんこんにちは。経済産業大臣の梶山博です。本日はネットゼロリーダーズサミットにご参加いただきありがとうございます。本日ご講演をいただいた経団連会長のTOKURA正和様、パネリストの皆様をはじめ、本日お集まりいただいたすべての皆様に心から感謝申し上げます。日本は昨年10月、菅総理が2050年カーボンニュートラルを表明いたしました。温暖化への対応を成長の機会と捉える認識が世界的に広まっています。日本としても2050年カーボンニュートラルへの挑戦を次なる成長につなげるため、経済産業省がリードする形で日本政府を挙げた産業政策としてグリーン成長戦略を策定いたしました。この戦略に基づきあらゆる政策を総動員してカーボンニュートラルを実現していきたいと思います。経済産業省では例えば企業の皆様の大胆な投資や革新的なイノベーションを後押しするため、新たに創設した2兆円の基金を活用した支援に取り組んでおります。また、アジアの現実的な脱炭素へのトランジションを支援するため、6月の日ASEANエネルギー大臣特別会合において、アジアエネルギートランジションイニシアティブを提案しました。これらの政策を通じて世界全体でのカーボンニュートラルに向けた取り組みや支援を着実に実施してまいります。本日のセミナーでは多様な地域事業分野の第一線で活躍するグローバルリーダーの皆様の議論を通じてカーボンニュートラルを目指す上での今後の展望や国際的な連携の必要性等についてさまざまな示唆があったものと思います。これらのご議論からの学びを得て日本政府としても中長期的な視点で さまざまなアプローチによりグローバルに脱炭素化への取り組みを支援してまいります。日本政府としては企業の皆様の主体的な取り組みを支える環境整備も進めていきます。ネットゼロリーダーズサミットでは日本企業の優れた技術やビジネス拠点としての日本の地域の魅力を発信するとともに国内外の企業間でのオープンイノベーションを生み出すための機会を提供しています。ジャパンテクノロジーショーケースの各出展ブースではカーボンニュートラルに加えデジタルヘルスケア等の幅広い分野において日本の魅力的なスタートアップ、中堅中小企業、そして地方自治体を含む合計54団体が集い個別の商談会を実施しています。ぜひこちらもご活用いただければ幸いです。このイベントが日本が誇る企業や市場の可能性を世界中の方に知っていただく機会になるとともに脱炭素化等に向けた変革や挑戦への契機となることを期待しています。最後になりますが本日ご参加の皆様の今後のますますのご発展を願い私の挨拶とさせていただきます。ありがとうございました。
Minister Kajiyama, thank you. This concludes the Net Zero Leaders Summit, Japan Business Conference 2021, towards a positive cycle of economic growth and environment protection. In the virtual event site, you can still communicate with other exhibitors and participants in real time through avatars. Please join us as much as your time permits. Thank you for watching.